My name is Rebecca Holloway, 29 years old, and my carefully built life almost fell apart when I discovered my father and brother's secret plan to drain my savings. After years of promising they'd changed, my father made a series of calculated moves that would have left me financially ruined while they walked away without consequences. My brother thought I would quietly accept it like always, but this time they went too far. The consequences were much bigger than anyone could have imagined. Before continuing my story, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Like and subscribe for more family secrets nobody talks about. Growing up in our suburban Connecticut home, I learned early that perfection wasn't just expected, it was demanded. Our colonial-style house with its pristine white fence and manicured lawn was the perfect metaphor for my family. Beautiful on the outside, damaged on the inside. My father, Richard Holloway, was respected in our community as a successful businessman who had an answer for everything. My mother, Linda, spent most of her time maintaining our picture-perfect image, though her tired eyes told a different story. Then there was my brother, Kyle. 3 years younger than me, he somehow became the center of our family universe. While I was held to impossible standards, Kyle floated through life with minimal expectations and maximum praise. If I brought home a B+, I'd face disappointment and lectures about reaching my potential. When Kyle managed a C, there were celebrations about how hard he tried. My earliest memory of this unfair dynamic came when I was 7. I had spent weeks practicing for my piano recital, perfecting every note of Beethoven's Für Elise. The night of the performance, my fingers moved flawlessly across the keys. When I finished, there was polite applause, and my father's only comment was, "Your timing was off in the middle section." That same weekend, Kyle scored a goal in his soccer game, his first all season. My parents took us out for ice cream, bought him a new video game, and talked about his achievement for days. I sat quietly eating my melting ice cream cone, wondering what I needed to do to deserve that kind of attention. By the time I was 12, I had internalized a painful truth. In our family, I was the responsible one, the reliable one, but never the celebrated one. I became my own support system, learning to validate myself because external validation rarely came. I poured myself into academics, knowing education would be my ticket to independence. In high school, I worked part-time jobs while maintaining straight A's. My parents never attended my debate team competitions, even when we went to state finals. They were always too busy, usually with something related to Kyle. Meanwhile, they never missed one of his football games, even when they had to drive 3 hours to an away game. "Rebecca can handle herself," my father would say proudly to other parents, as if my independence was their accomplishment rather than something I'd been forced to develop in their absence. The summer before college, I overheard a conversation that confirmed what I'd always suspected. My father was in his study with my uncle David, discussing finances. "College is going to be expensive," my uncle said. 2 kids, back to back. "Well," my father replied, his voice lowered but still audible. "Rebecca's got scholarships and she can work. We're saving most of the college fund for Kyle. You know how boys are. They need more time to find their way. Rebecca's always been self-sufficient." I stood frozen in the hallway, a glass of water in my hand, as the truth crashed over me. The college fund I'd been told about my entire life, the reason I'd worked so hard for scholarships, was never really meant for me. It had always been Kyle's. That night, I made a promise to myself. I would never depend on my family for anything again. I would build my own life, my own security, my own future, without them. And I did exactly that. I worked multiple jobs through college, graduated with honors, and landed a position at a prestigious marketing firm in Boston. I lived frugally, saved aggressively, and by 27, I had what many of my peers didn't: financial stability, a growing investment portfolio, and a clear path forward. For years, I kept minimal contact with my family. Holiday visits, occasional phone calls, enough to maintain appearances but not enough to reopen old wounds. I thought I had escaped the dynamics that defined my childhood. I was wrong. When my mother called last spring, saying she missed me and wanted me to visit for a few weeks, Something in her voice made me agree. Perhaps time and distance had changed things. Perhaps we could build a new kind of relationship as adults. I arranged to work remotely and drove back to Connecticut, hoping but not expecting things to be different. Little did I know, I was walking into a carefully laid trap, one that had been months in the making. The moment I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home, I should have recognized the signs. My father's warm welcome, Kyle's unusual attentiveness, even the guest room, prepared with fresh flowers and new sheets. Everything was too perfect, too welcoming. The first few days at my parents' house were surprisingly pleasant. Mom cooked my favorite meals. Dad asked about my work with what seemed like genuine interest, and Kyle shared stories about his struggling construction business with uncharacteristic humility. I started to believe that perhaps we had all grown up, that time had healed old wounds. On the fourth night, after dinner, my father suggested we have coffee in his study. "I'd like your opinion on something, Rebecca," he said, a statement so unprecedented that I nearly asked him to repeat it. My opinion had never mattered much in this house. The study hadn't changed. Dark wood shelves lined with business books he'd never read, framed awards on the walls, and the large mahogany desk where he'd lectured me countless times about responsibility. As I sat across from him, I noticed subtle signs of financial strain I hadn't seen before. His watch was an older model. The leather chair had cracks that hadn't been repaired. The brandy he poured was a cheaper brand than he'd normally allow in his home. "You've done well for yourself," he began, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Your mother and I are proud of you." I smiled politely, though the compliment felt foreign. "Thank you." Kyle, on the other hand, has hit some rough patches. He sighed heavily, placing his glass down. His business is underwater. He owes suppliers, has tax problems. It's quite serious. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said cautiously, already feeling the familiar weight of family expectations settling on my shoulders. "We've helped as much as we can," he continued, "but with the market downturn, our retirement accounts took a hit, and your mother's medical issues last year." He trailed off, letting me fill in the blanks. I hadn't heard about any medical issues. Another piece of family news I'd been excluded from. "What about business loans?" I asked. "Or restructuring his debt?" My father shook his head. "His credit is shot. No bank will touch him." He leaned forward, his expression shifting to one I recognized from childhood. The look he'd give before assigning responsibility. He needs a co-signer for a consolidation loan, someone with excellent credit and proof of income. And there it was. I felt a cold realization spread through me. This wasn't a casual family visit. This was a strategic move to access my financial stability. "How much are we talking about?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "About $87,000, he replied, as if it were a small sum. I nearly choked. "That's a substantial amount." "It would only be on paper," he assured me quickly. "Kyle will make the payments. You wouldn't have to contribute a dime. It's just your signature we need." I knew better. Co-signing meant I would be legally responsible for every penny if Kyle defaulted, which, given his history, was more likely than not. I also knew saying no outright would trigger the family dynamics I'd spent years escaping. "I need to think about it," I said carefully. "Maybe look at his business plan, the loan terms." Something flashed in my father's eyes. Disappointment, perhaps frustration. He hadn't expected resistance. "Of course," he said smoothly. "Take all the time you need. But we do need to move quickly. The situation is time-sensitive." That night, I couldn't sleep. The walls of my childhood bedroom seemed to close in on me. I'd worked too hard to risk my financial security on Kyle's struggling business. But I also knew how persuasive, how relentless my father could be. The next morning, I decided to do some investigating. While everyone was out, my mother at her book club, my father at golf, and Kyle supposedly meeting with suppliers, I found myself drawn to my father's study again. I had no intention of snooping, not really. But then I noticed his laptop open on the desk, his email account logged in. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the mouse. This wasn't like me. I respected privacy, believed in trust. But something about this situation felt wrong, manipulated. One click, and I saw it. An email thread between my father and Kyle, dating back 3 months. The subject line, Rebecca's visit. She's doing better than we thought, my father had written. Investment portfolio, savings, excellent credit score. If we handle this correctly, she could be the solution to all our problems. Kyle's response made me physically ill. She owes us anyway. All those years of private school and college. About time she paid something back to the family. I continued reading, my hands trembling. They had planned this entire visit. The warm welcome, the family meals, the sudden interest in my life, all part of a strategy to access my money. The loan wasn't $87,000. It was closer to $150,000 when all debts were combined, and they had no intention of repaying it. Once she co-signs, we'll have breathing room, my father wrote. If things go south, it's on her credit, not ours. I closed the laptop, feeling a strange calm settle over me. The anger would come later, I knew. For now, I needed clarity and a plan. They had underestimated me again. They saw me as the reliable, responsible Rebecca, who would sacrifice herself for family harmony. They didn't know the woman I had become, someone who had built boundaries along with her bank account. I spent the rest of the day in a strange state of detachment, observing my family as if through glass. When they returned home, I played my part, the dutiful daughter considering a generous financial favor. Inside, I was strategizing my exit. That evening, Kyle cornered me in the kitchen while I was making tea. His approach was different from our father's, less authoritative, more appeal to sibling loyalty. Dad told me you're thinking about the co-signing thing, he said, leaning against the counter with forced casualness. It would really save my life, Becca. Becca, a nickname he only used when he wanted something. I studied him as I stirred honey into my tea. My little brother had grown into a man who looked remarkably like our father. Same confident posture, same ability to appear sincere on demand. Tell me about your business troubles, I said. I'd like to understand exactly what happened. For a moment, he seemed caught off guard. He recovered quickly, launching into a well-rehearsed story about market conditions, unreliable partners, and unexpected expenses. Not once did he mention personal responsibility or poor decisions. It sounds difficult, I said when he finished. I'm sorry you're going through that. He looked relieved, misinterpreting my empathy as compliance. So you'll help? I swear I'll make every payment. You won't have to worry about a thing. I'll give you my answer tomorrow, I replied. I just need one more night to work out some details. He hugged me then, something he rarely did. You're the best, Becca. I knew I could count on you. After he left, I sat alone in the kitchen, sipping my tea and finalizing my plan. I had already called my boss to cut my vacation short, citing a family emergency. I had booked a hotel room in town for the next night. I had contacted my bank and financial advisor to secure my accounts. All that remained was the confrontation I'd spent a lifetime avoiding. I slept surprisingly well that night. There's a certain freedom in finally seeing the truth, even when it's painful. The next morning, I packed my belongings quietly and loaded them into my car before anyone else was awake. Then I made coffee and waited at the kitchen table. My father was the first to appear, already dressed in a crisp button-down shirt despite it being Saturday. He seemed pleased to find me there, pouring himself coffee and sitting across from me with a newspaper. "Beautiful morning," he commented. "Have you given any more thought to our discussion?" "I have," I replied calmly. "I've thought about it a great deal." Something in my tone made him look up from his paper, studying me with newfound attention. "I've decided I can't co-sign the loan," I continued before he could speak. "It would be financially irresponsible." His expression darkened. "Rebecca, this is your brother we're talking about. Family helps family." "Yes," I agreed. "Family should help family. But this isn't help. It's exploitation." He put his paper down completely now, his jaw tightening. "That's a strong word." "It's the correct word. I saw the emails, Dad. I know this visit was planned. I know about the real amount of debt. I know you and Kyle never intended for me to be paid back." The color drained from his face, then returned with a flush of anger. "You went through my private correspondence?" "Your laptop was open," I said, finding it almost amusing that this was his concern. "But that's not the point. The point is that you and Kyle conspired to put me in financial jeopardy without any regard for my well-being." My mother walked in then, stopping short when she sensed the tension. "What's going on?" "Rebecca is refusing to help her brother," my father said, his voice hardening. "After everything we've done for her." I turned to my mother, curious if she had been part of this scheme. The confusion in her eyes suggested not. At least, not fully. Another of my father's tactics, compartmentalizing information, ensuring no one had the complete picture except him. "Mom, did you know that Dad and Kyle planned this entire visit weeks ago specifically to get me to co-sign a massive loan that would put my financial future at risk?" Her hesitation told me everything. "Richard, what is she talking about?" "She's exaggerating," he dismissed. "It's a simple family matter. Kyle needs help, and Rebecca, who has the means to provide it, is choosing not to." I stood up then, feeling calmer than I had in years. I've spent my entire life trying to earn approval in this family, working harder, achieving more, asking for less. And it was never enough. This situation has made one thing very clear to me. It will never be enough. Kyle appeared in the doorway, looking between us with growing concern. "What's going on?" "Rebecca knows about the emails," my father said shortly. Kyle's face fell, then hardened. "So what? We needed help. And your family. You're supposed to be there for us." "When have any of you ever been there for me?" I asked quietly. "When I needed support, guidance, even just acknowledgement? My entire life, I've been expected to give while you take. That ends today." The kitchen fell silent. My question hung in the air, unanswered because we all knew the truth. I had been the family's reliable safety net, never their priority. "I've already packed my things," I continued. "I'm checking into a hotel today and flying back to Boston tomorrow." "You're overreacting," my father said, his voice regaining its authoritative edge. "This is childish, Rebecca." "No, Dad. This is self-preservation." I picked up my purse from the chair beside me. "I've spent my entire adult life building financial security that you and Kyle were willing to destroy in an instant. That's not love. That's not family." My mother stepped forward, placing a hand on my arm. "Honey, please. Let's talk about this. I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding." I looked into her eyes, seeing the familiar conflict there. She had always been caught between my father's dominance and her own conscience. Part of me pitied her. "Mom, the emails were very clear. They calculated exactly how much they could extract from me. They discussed how to manipulate me during this visit. There's no misunderstanding." Kyle scoffed, dropping the concerned act now that it was useless. "You've always thought you were better than us. With your fancy job and your perfect life, you have no idea what real struggle is." The irony of his statement almost made me laugh. I'd struggled my entire life, for recognition, for fairness, for the right to exist as something other than a resource for others to use. "I earned everything I have," I replied evenly. "And I won't apologize for protecting it." My father stood up, his height still intimidating even though I was no longer a child. "If you walk out that door, don't expect to be welcomed back. Family loyalty goes both ways." "Does it?" I asked. "Because from where I stand, loyalty in this family has only ever flowed in one direction, toward you and Kyle. I've finally realized that I deserve better." I walked to the door, turning back one last time. "I truly hope you both find a way out of your financial troubles, but it won't be through me." The drive to the hotel was surreal. Rain had started to fall, pattering against my windshield in rhythm with my racing thoughts. Had I really just done that? Had I finally stood up to the family dynamic that had shaped my entire life? Part of me wanted to turn around, to apologize, to fall back into the comfortable pattern of self-sacrifice. It would be easier, in some ways. familiar. But another part, the part that had built a life in Boston, that had learned to validate herself without external approval, knew this was long overdue. At the hotel, I collapsed onto the bed, emotionally drained. I checked my phone to find multiple missed calls and messages from my mother, one terse text from my father demanding I stop this nonsense and come home, and nothing from Kyle. Typical. I turned my phone off and stared at the ceiling, letting the magnitude of what had just happened wash over me. For the first time in my life, I had put myself first in relation to my family. The relief was palpable, but so was the grief. I was mourning the family I had always wanted but never had, the one where I was valued for who I was, not what I could provide. That evening I ordered room service and opened my laptop, needing distraction. Instead of checking work emails, I found myself searching family dynamics favoritism, and then adult children of emotionally unavailable parents. The results were like reading my own biography. Stories of people who grew up feeling invisible in their own homes. People who became hyper-independent out of necessity. People who struggled with self-worth because they'd never been properly valued. I read until my eyes burned, feeling less alone with each article, each forum post. There were others like me. Millions of them. People who had grown up believing they were somehow defective, only to realize as adults that the defect lay in the family system, not in them. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was Aunt Sophia, my mother's sister who lived in California. We weren't close. She and my mother had drifted apart years ago, another relationship casualty of my father's isolating influence. "Your mother called me, very upset," the message read. "I know we haven't talked much, but I want you to know I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. It took me years to do the same with my ex-husband. If you need someone to talk to, I'm here." I stared at the message, tears blurring my vision. Support from an unexpected quarter, a reminder that family could mean something different than what I'd experienced. "Thank you," I wrote back. "That means more than you know." I slept deeply that night, without the dreams that usually plagued me in my childhood home. In the morning, I felt lighter somehow, as if I'd put down a heavy burden I'd been carrying for decades. Over breakfast, I made a decision. This wouldn't just be an escape from a financial trap. It would be the beginning of a new relationship with myself and with the concept of family. One built on mutual respect rather than obligation and exploitation. Before checking out, I wrote a letter to my mother, explaining my feelings more fully than I had during our confrontation. I told her I loved her but needed space to heal. I told her she was welcome in my life if she could respect my boundaries. I told her that real family supports each other's growth and well-being, not just in words, but in actions. I didn't know if she would understand. I didn't know if anything would change. But for the first time, that uncertainty didn't terrify me. I had found my voice and I wasn't going to silence it again. Not for family harmony, not for approval, not for anything. The return to Boston felt like coming home in a way that my parents' house never had. My apartment, small but thoughtfully decorated, filled with books and art I loved, welcomed me with a peace that contrasted sharply with the tension I'd left behind in Connecticut. The first week back, I threw myself into work, grateful for the structured distraction. My colleagues noticed a change in me, though they couldn't quite name it. "You seem different," my friend and coworker Diane commented over lunch. "More present somehow." I smiled, stirring my soup thoughtfully. I finally stood up to my family. It was long overdue. Diane, who knew bits and pieces of my childhood from late-night conversations during business trips, reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Good for you. That takes courage." It felt less like courage and more like survival, I admitted. They were trying to use me again, and something just broke. I couldn't do it anymore. "That is courage," she insisted. "Breaking patterns takes strength, especially family ones." Maybe she was right. The following weeks brought a strange mixture of emotions: relief, sadness, anger, and unexpected moments of joy. I found myself laughing more easily, sleeping more soundly, making decisions without the constant weight of anticipated family judgment. My mother called daily at first. I let most go to voicemail, needing space, but I listened to each message. Her tone evolved from pleading to reflective. In her most recent call, she'd said something that surprised me. "I'm starting to understand some things about our family that I've been avoiding for a long time." I wasn't ready to engage yet, but I saved that message. Maybe, just maybe, there was hope for some kind of healthier relationship in the future, at least with her. My father and Kyle maintained radio silence. According to my mother, they were hurt and confused by my sudden change in attitude. The reframing was predictable. In their narrative, I was the one who had changed, who had broken the family contract. In reality, I had simply stopped accepting terms that had always been unfair. 3 weeks after my return, I received an unexpected email from my cousin Melanie, my Uncle David's daughter. We had been close as children, but had drifted apart in adulthood, our communication reduced to birthday texts and occasional social media comments. "I heard what happened with Uncle Richard and Kyle," she wrote. "My dad told me some of it, though I suspect he doesn't know everything. I just wanted to say I admire you for drawing a line. It couldn't have been easy. I'm in Boston next month for a conference. Would you want to get coffee?" The email brought tears to my eyes. Another unexpected ally. I wrote back immediately, suggesting my favorite cafe near the public garden. When we met, the years fell away. Melanie had grown into a confident woman with a sharp wit and warm laugh. After catching up on careers and mutual acquaintances, she brought up what had happened. "Dad always said Uncle Richard played favorites," she told me over her second latte. "He said it was obvious from when you were little, but no one in the family felt they could say anything." "They knew?" I asked, surprised that others had seen what I'd experienced. She nodded. "Dad tried to talk to Uncle Richard once, when you were maybe 10. It caused a huge fight. After that, he just tried to be extra kind to you when you were around, but I know he felt guilty for not doing more." I absorbed this information, feeling a complex mix of validation and renewed hurt. Others had seen my struggle and remained largely silent, but Melanie's father had at least tried and had been pushed away for his efforts, a dynamic I now understood all too well. "Does your dad know about their financial scheme?" I asked. Melanie's expression darkened. "Some of it. Enough that he's furious. He's been trying to convince Grandma not to bail them out." This was news to me. "They've asked your grandmother for money?" "Apparently, after you refused, they went to her. Dad says they're trying to get her to take out a reverse mortgage or something." She paused, seeming to debate whether to continue. "There's more to the story than just Kyle's business troubles. Dad thinks Uncle Richard made some bad investments of his own. The house might even be at risk." I sat back, processing this. The situation was worse than I'd realized. No wonder they had been so desperate to use my credit and savings. They were trying to save themselves from complete financial collapse. Part of me felt a vindictive satisfaction. They were facing consequences for their actions. But another part felt concern, especially for my mother. Whatever her failings as a parent, she didn't deserve to lose her home because of my father and brother's financial recklessness. "I should warn my mother," I said, half to myself. Melanie nodded. "That's why I told you. I thought you'd want to know, even though you're keeping your distance." After our meeting, I sat in the public garden, watching children play by the duck statues, considering what to do with this information. I couldn't rescue my father and brother. Not financially, not emotionally. Their problems were of their own making, and enabling them would only perpetuate destructive patterns. But my mother deserved to know the full extent of the situation she was facing. That night I broke my silence and called her directly. "Rebecca?" Her voice was tentative, hopeful. "I'm so glad you called." "Mom, there's something you need to know," I said, bypassing pleasantries. "It's about Dad and Kyle's financial situation. I think it's worse than they've told you." The silence on the other end of the line confirmed my suspicion. She didn't know. "What do you mean?" she finally asked, her voice small. I told her everything Melanie had shared, as gently as I could. I explained about the potential reverse mortgage, about my father's suspected investment losses, about the possibility that their home was in jeopardy. "Why wouldn't he tell me this?" she whispered. The question broke my heart. After decades of marriage, she was still being kept in the dark, still being manipulated. "Because control is how he operates," I said softly. "Information is power, and he's never liked sharing power." We talked for over an hour, the most honest conversation we'd ever had. She cried, apologized, questioned her own choices. I listened, offering support without taking responsibility for her emotions. "What should I do?" she asked finally. "I can't answer that for you," I replied. "But I think you deserve to know exactly what's happening with your finances. All of them. It's your home too. Your life. Your future." After we hung up, I felt a strange mix of sadness and hope. My mother had been both victim and enabler in our family's dysfunction. She had failed to protect me, but she had also been controlled in ways I was only beginning to understand. Perhaps this crisis would be her catalyst for change, just as it had been mine. The fallout came swiftly. 2 days after my conversation with my mother, she called again, her voice raw from crying, but with an undercurrent of resolve I'd rarely heard from her. "I asked to see all the financial documents," she told me. "Richard refused at first, but I insisted. Rebecca, it's worse than you said. The house has 2 mortgages. His retirement account is nearly empty. There are credit cards I never knew existed." My stomach tightened. "I'm so sorry, Mom." "Don't be. I should have asked these questions years ago." She paused, and I could hear her taking a steadying breath. "I've called a lawyer, and I've moved some money into an account only I can access. My inheritance from Grandma that I've been saving." I was stunned. This was more initiative than I'd ever seen from her. That's good, Mom. Really good." "Your father is furious," she continued. "He says I'm being manipulated by you, that I'm betraying the family just like you did. But for the first time, I can see how he twists things. How he's always twisted things." We talked for nearly 2 hours. She asked questions about my childhood, about how I'd felt growing up as the less favored child. For once, she truly listened to my answers without defending or deflecting. There were moments of painful recognition, moments where she had to confront her own complicity in what had happened to me. It wasn't a perfect conversation, but it was real. Perhaps the first real exchange we'd ever had. In the weeks that followed, my mother began therapy. She sent me articles about family systems, about enabling behaviors, about emotional neglect. "I'm trying to understand," she wrote in one email. "I'm trying to be better, even if it's late." Meanwhile, my father escalated his attempts to regain control. He called my office, sent strongly worded emails, and even reached out to mutual family friends to express concern about my mental state. When those tactics failed, he shifted to guilt, sending a letter detailing all the sacrifices he'd made for me over the years, conveniently omitting the ways he'd favored Kyle. Kyle took a different approach. After weeks of silence, he texted me with a half-hearted apology. "I didn't mean for things to go this far. Dad was the one who pushed the loan idea. I just need help getting back on my feet, and then I can pay everyone back." I didn't respond. His message was still transactional. He wanted something from me. There was no acknowledgement of the deeper pattern, no real understanding of why his actions had been wrong. While my family drama unfolded from a distance, my life in Boston began to expand in unexpected ways. The energy I'd once spent managing family tensions now went into friendships, hobbies, and self-discovery. I joined a book club, took a ceramics class, and started weekend hiking trips in the New England countryside. Most significantly, I found a support group for adult children of dysfunctional families. Meeting others with similar experiences was profoundly healing. We met weekly in a community center downtown, sharing stories and strategies, validating each other's realities in ways our families never had. "The hardest part is the grief," shared Tara, a graphic designer whose mother had been an alcoholic. "You're mourning the family you needed but never had." "And the second guessing," added James, whose father sounded remarkably similar to mine. "That voice that says maybe you're overreacting, Maybe it wasn't that bad. I nodded, recognizing both feelings intimately. For me, it's the guilt. Even knowing they tried to exploit me, I still feel guilty for saying no, for putting myself first. That's how you know the programming runs deep, said Gloria, our group facilitator. When protecting yourself feels like a transgression, that's the family system talking, not your authentic self. These conversations gave me a framework for understanding my experiences, a vocabulary for feelings I'd struggled to articulate. I began to see how my hyper-independence, my perfectionism, my difficulty accepting help, traits I'd always considered strengths, were actually adaptive responses to childhood emotional neglect. 4 months after my confrontation with my family, my mother called with news that sent shockwaves through our already fractured family system. "I've filed for divorce," she said simply, after 34 years. Despite the tension that had been building, I was stunned. "Mom, are you sure?" "More sure than I've been about anything in decades," she replied, her voice steady. The financial deception was the breaking point, but it's been a long time coming. I've spent my entire adult life walking on eggshells, making myself smaller to accommodate your father's ego. I don't want to spend whatever time I have left doing that. Pride swelled in my chest. My mother, who had spent decades enabling my father's behavior, was finally choosing herself. It couldn't have been easy, especially at her age. "Where will you go?" I asked. "What will you do?" "I'm staying with Sophia in California for now," she said, referring to her sister, my aunt who had reached out to me months earlier. "The lawyer thinks I'll get half of whatever assets are left, which isn't much, but it's something to start over with. And Sophia has connections at the hospital there. They might have a position in the administrative office." My mother had been a nurse before marrying my father, who had insisted she stay home after Kyle was born. The thought of her returning to work, building her own life, was both wonderful and sad. What might her life have been if she'd made this break years ago? "What about Dad and Kyle?" I asked. Her sigh carried years of accumulated fatigue. "They'll have to figure things out for themselves, just as I'm doing. Just as you've been doing all along." After we hung up, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset over the Boston skyline, thinking about cycles breaking and new beginnings at unexpected times. My mother was 62, starting over. I was 29, rebuilding my understanding of family and self. Even Kyle and my father, though they might not see it yet, were being given an opportunity to grow beyond the dysfunctional roles they'd inhabited for so long. I didn't know what the future held for any of us. I didn't know if my relationship with my mother would continue to heal, or if my father and brother would ever genuinely acknowledge the harm they'd caused. But for the first time, I felt hopeful. Not because I expected perfect resolution, but because I knew that regardless of what happened with them, I would be okay. I had found my voice, my boundaries, and a community that understood and supported me. That night I wrote in my journal, "Family isn't just who you're born to. It's also who you choose, who chooses you, who sees you truly, and values what they see." I'm building that kind of family now, one honest conversation at a time. Seasons changed, leaves fell, snow blanketed Boston, and then spring brought new growth, a fitting backdrop to the evolution happening in my life. 1 year after my confrontation with my father and brother, I sat in my newly renovated apartment, sipping coffee and reflecting on how much had changed. My mother had settled in California, working part-time at a hospital and renting a small but sunny apartment near my Aunt Sophia. Our relationship had transformed through weekly phone calls, occasional visits, and ongoing honest conversations. It wasn't perfect. Decades of patterns couldn't be undone in a year. But it was real in a way it had never been before. "I keep finding new ways I failed you," she told me during one particularly emotional call. "Things I didn't see, or chose not to see." "I'm not looking for you to self-flagellate, Mom," I replied gently. "Just to see me now." And she was trying, really trying, to do just that. She asked questions about my life, listened to my answers, and shared her own struggles without making them my responsibility. She sent thoughtful gifts, books she thought I'd enjoy, a handmade scarf, seeds from her small balcony garden, not to buy affection, but to show she was paying attention to who I really was. The divorce proceedings had been finalized 3 months ago. My father fought it bitterly, using every delay tactic his lawyer could devise, but ultimately couldn't prevent it. According to my mother, he and Kyle were still living in the family home, though they'd had to take in a roommate to help cover costs. I had maintained my distance from both of them. My father had sent several messages alternating between demanding reconciliation and offering carefully worded non-apologies. "I'm sorry you felt hurt," rather than, "I'm sorry I hurt you." I didn't respond. Kyle had made one attempt to contact me on my birthday with a generic card and a note saying, "Family should stick together." The irony wasn't lost on me. My career had flourished in unexpected ways. The confidence I'd gained from standing up for myself translated to assertiveness at work. I successfully pitched a new marketing strategy that brought in 2 major clients, resulting in a promotion to senior marketing director with a substantial raise. "You're not second-guessing yourself anymore," my boss noted during my performance review. "Your presentations have always been excellent, but now you deliver them like you truly believe in your ideas." It was true. The constant internal critic, the voice that sounded suspiciously like my father, had quieted. Not disappeared, but diminished, allowing my own voice to strengthen. Most significantly, I had begun to build what Gloria from my support group called a chosen family. Diane from work had become a close friend, joining me for weekend hikes and movie nights. My cousin Melanie visited regularly. Our childhood bond rekindled into adult friendship. Members of my support group formed a tight-knit circle, sharing holidays and celebrations together. And then there was Alex, a literature professor I'd met at a bookstore event 6 months ago. Our relationship had developed slowly, thoughtfully. I was cautious, aware of how my family background had affected my approach to relationships, my tendency to overgive, to suppress my own needs, to confuse care with sacrifice. "Take all the time you need," Alex had said when I explained my hesitation. "I'm not going anywhere." And he hadn't. He'd been patient, respectful of my boundaries, consistent in his actions and words. He'd joined me at support group meetings when I invited him, reading books about family systems to better understand my experiences. He shared his own family history, healthier than mine, but not without its complications. Last night, over dinner at his apartment, he'd said something that moved me deeply. "I love the way you've rebuilt yourself. It takes courage to examine the blueprint you were given and decide to draw a new one." Now, as morning light filtered through my curtains, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Good news, got the library job. Full benefits and they're fine with my schedule at the hospital. Sophia says to tell you she's relieved she won't have to keep sharing her tiny office with me." I smiled, typing back congratulations. My mother working 2 jobs at 63 might seem sad to some, but I knew better. This was her claiming independence, building security she controlled, creating an identity beyond wife and mother. It was her version of what I'd been doing, reconstructing her life on healthier terms. My phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't my mother. It was a Connecticut number I didn't recognize. The message made my blood run cold. "Rebecca, it's Wendy from next door to your parents. Your father had a heart attack last night. Kyle asked me to contact you. They're at Greenwich Hospital." My first instinct was to ignore it, another manipulation perhaps. But something told me this was genuine. I called the hospital directly and confirmed that Richard Holloway had indeed been admitted last night. His condition was listed as stable. I sat with the information, allowing myself to feel the complex emotions it triggered. Concern, certainly. Despite everything, he was still my father. Anger that even this crisis would likely become another demand for my support. Guilt that my first reaction had been suspicion rather than worry. And underneath it all, a quiet certainty that I needed to respond on my own terms, not out of obligation or fear. I called Alex, then my support group facilitator Gloria, talking through my options and feelings. Both reminded me that visiting my father didn't mean surrendering my boundaries. I could show basic human compassion without reverting to old patterns. "You get to decide what this looks like," Gloria emphasized. A brief hospital visit, a phone call, a card, or nothing at all. There's no single right answer. After careful consideration, I booked a flight to Connecticut for the following day. Not out of duty, not out of guilt, but from a place of choice. I would see my father, assess the situation, and maintain the boundaries I'd worked so hard to establish. Before leaving, I called my mother to tell her my decision. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "You don't owe them anything." "I know," I assured her. "This is for me, not for them. I need to see him from my new perspective, to know that I can be in his presence without being diminished by it." She understood. "Just remember who you are now. Don't let them pull you back into old roles." The flight to Connecticut gave me time to prepare mentally. I rehearsed responses to potential manipulation tactics, reminded myself of my worth and my right to boundaries, and practiced the grounding techniques my therapist had taught me. Landing at the airport felt like crossing into former territory, familiar but no longer home. I rented a car and drove directly to Greenwich Hospital, my hands steady on the wheel despite the anxiety fluttering in my chest. The hospital corridors were a maze of antiseptic smells and muted conversations. Following the nurse's directions, I found my father's room and paused outside the door, taking a deep breath. Through the small window, I could see him, diminished somehow, gray-faced against white sheets, tubes connecting him to various machines. Kyle was slumped in a chair beside the bed, scrolling through his phone. I knocked lightly and entered. Kyle looked up, surprise and relief washing over his features. "Rebecca, you came." He stood awkwardly, as if unsure whether to hug me. I nodded, keeping a comfortable distance. "How is he?" "Stable. It was a moderate heart attack. They put in a stent." Kyle looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes. "The doctor says he needs to make serious lifestyle changes." My father stirred at the sound of our voices, his eyes opening slowly. When he saw me, something flickered across his face. Shock, perhaps relief, perhaps calculation. Even now, I couldn't fully trust my reading of him. "Rebecca," he said, his voice weaker than I'd ever heard it. "You're here." "Yes," I replied simply, moving closer to the bed but still maintaining space. "I heard what happened. How are you feeling?" What followed was a strange, stilted conversation. Surface-level exchanges about his condition, his prognosis, the doctor's recommendations. Neither of us mentioned our estrangement or the events that had caused it. Kyle hovered nervously, occasionally adding medical details or answering questions I directed at my father. After about 20 minutes, a nurse came in to check my father's vital signs. I used the interruption to step out into the hallway, needing a moment alone. Kyle followed me. "Thanks for coming," he said, running a hand through his unkempt hair. "I wasn't sure you would." "Neither was I admitted. He shifted uncomfortably. "Look, about what happened last year." I held up a hand, stopping him. "I didn't come here for that conversation. I came because a family member is in the hospital, that's all." "But we are family," he insisted, a hint of the old entitlement creeping into his tone. "And we need your help now more than ever. Dad's medical bills, the house." There it was. Not even a health crisis could change the fundamental dynamic. I was still seen primarily as a resource. "Kyle," I interrupted, my voice firm but not unkind. "My being here doesn't change anything about our situation. I'm not getting involved financially. I'm not coming back into the family system as it existed before. I came to check on Dad's health, nothing more." His face hardened. "So you'll just leave us to deal with this alone?" Real compassionate, Becca. I didn't rise to the bait. "You and Dad are adults who made choices. Those choices have consequences. I hope he recovers fully, and I hope you both find ways to manage your situations. But it won't be through me." I returned to the room to say goodbye to my father, promising to check in by phone. His response surprised me. "I understand," he said quietly. "And thank you for coming at all. You didn't have to." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a recognition of all that had happened between us. But it was perhaps the first time he had acknowledged that my presence in his life was not an obligation, but a choice. My choice. As I drove away from the hospital, I felt a strange lightness. I had faced my past without being consumed by it. I had shown compassion without compromising myself. Most importantly, I had remained firmly rooted in my new identity. Not the perpetual family caretaker, not the invisible child seeking validation, but an adult who could define her own relationships on her own terms. Back at my hotel, I called my mother to update her, then Alex to tell him I'd be home the next day as planned. "I'm proud of you," Alex said softly. "However you're feeling right now, it's okay." I thought about that as I prepared for bed. How was I feeling? Sad for the relationship with my father that never was, and likely never would be. Relieved that I had maintained my boundaries. Grateful for the new connections in my life that showed me what healthy love looked like. And somewhere underneath it all, peaceful, knowing that whatever happened with my father and brother going forward, I would be okay. 6 months after my father's heart attack, I stood in my Boston apartment surrounded by half-packed boxes. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny stars. Change was coming again, but this time by choice, rather than necessity. My phone rang, my mother calling for our weekly check-in. I balanced it between ear and shoulder as I continued wrapping mugs in newspaper. "How's the packing going?" she asked after we'd exchanged greetings. "Slowly but surely," I replied. I forgot how much stuff I've accumulated over the years. "That's what happens when you stay in one place long enough to put down roots," she said, a hint of wistfulness in her voice. "I still can't believe you're moving to Chicago." "It's a great opportunity," I reminded her. "The agency's expanding, and heading the new office means a substantial promotion." What I didn't say, but we both knew, was that the distance from Connecticut, from my father and Kyle, was also a factor in my decision. Not the primary one, but significant nonetheless. After my hospital visit, I'd maintained minimal contact with my father. Brief, polite phone calls every few weeks to check on his recovery. He seemed changed by his health crisis, more subdued, less demanding. Whether this represented genuine growth or simply diminished energy, I couldn't be sure. Kyle had made several more attempts to discuss financial assistance, each time disguised as reconciliation efforts. I remained firm in my refusal, suggesting resources that might help him address his financial problems without involving me. Our conversations remained strained, surface-level exchanges that never addressed the deeper patterns that had damaged our relationship. "Have you told them you're moving?" my mother asked, intuiting the direction of my thoughts. "Not yet," I admitted. "I'll call Dad this weekend." We chatted a while longer about her life in California, her new book club, her growing friendship with a fellow hospital administrator, her first attempts at painting classes. At 63, she was building a life that was truly hers, perhaps for the first time. "Sophia and I are thinking of getting a slightly bigger place together when my lease is up," she mentioned. "It makes financial sense, and honestly, I've enjoyed having family around." Family. The word had taken on new meaning for both of us over the past year and a half. No longer a trap of obligation and role fulfillment, but a choice, a connection based on mutual care and respect. After we hung up, I returned to packing, carefully wrapping the ceramic mug I'd made in my pottery class. It was lopsided and imperfect, but I treasured it as a symbol of my willingness to try new things, to create rather than just achieve. My doorbell rang. It was Alex, arriving to help with the packing as promised. His literature department at Boston University had been surprisingly supportive when he'd requested a transfer to their sister campus in Chicago, arranging for him to teach remotely for one semester while applying for positions there. "Ready for more cardboard box fun?" he asked, kissing me quickly before hanging up his jacket. "Actually, I thought we might take a break," I replied. "Go for a walk by the river while the weather's nice. The boxes will still be here when we get back." He looked surprised but pleased. This was another change in me, the ability to set work aside, to prioritize experience over efficiency. The old Rebecca would have packed until everything was perfect, every box labeled and organized. The new Rebecca understood that life happened in the spaces between tasks, in moments of connection and presence. We walked along the Charles River, watching sailboats glide across the water, discussing our hopes for Chicago and sharing concerns about the transition. The conversation flowed easily between practical matters and deeper feelings, a balance I'd never experienced in my family of origin. "I've been thinking about something," I said, as we paused to watch a family of ducks navigate the current. "About patterns and how they replicate unless we consciously break them." Alex nodded encouragingly, waiting for me to continue. "My father treated me as the responsible one, the one who should sacrifice for others, while Kyle was permitted to take and take. I've spent the last year and a half learning to recognize and reject that pattern." I turned to face him fully. "But I've been wondering lately if I've swung too far in the other direction. If I've become so focused on protecting myself that I've closed off parts of my heart." "What makes you think that?" he asked gently. I considered the question carefully. When my father had his heart attack, my first response was suspicion, not concern. That bothers me. Not because I think I should have dropped everything and rushed to his side, but because I want to be someone who can feel compassion without fear. Someone who can give freely because she chooses to, not because she's manipulated into it. Alex was quiet for a moment, thoughtful. "I think that's the difference between boundaries and walls. Boundaries protect you while keeping your heart open. Walls protect you by shutting everything out." "Yes," I agreed. "And I'm still learning the difference. Still figuring out how to be generous without being exploited. How to care without losing myself." He took my hand as we continued walking. "For what it's worth, I think you're doing better at that balance than you realize. You've maintained some relationship with your father despite everything. You've supported your mother without taking responsibility for her choices. You've been incredibly generous with your friends. With me." His words warmed me. Not because they were praise, but because they reflected a version of myself I was working to become. Someone capable of authentic connection, of love without enmeshment. That evening, after Alex left, I called my father as planned. Our conversation was brief, factual. I told him about my move to Chicago, about the promotion. He congratulated me, asked a few questions about the timeline. There was an awkward pause. And then he said something unexpected. "I'm sorry things turned out this way between us, Rebecca." It wasn't the full acknowledgement I might have once hoped for, but it was something. A recognition that our relationship had been damaged, that something valuable had been lost. "I am too," I replied honestly. "Your mother seems happier in California." Another surprise. He rarely mentioned her. "Yes, I think she is." Another pause. "I'm glad for her. For both of you." After we hung up, I sat looking out my window at the Boston skyline, thinking about journeys and destinations. The past 18 months had taken me places I never expected to go. Through confrontation and loss, through grief and rebuilding, to a new understanding of myself and what family could mean. The road hadn't been straight or easy. There had been moments of doubt, of backsliding into old patterns, of questioning whether the pain of breaking away was worth it. But sitting here now, surrounded by boxes that represented not escape but opportunity, I knew it had been. My father and brother might never fully understand or accept the boundaries I'd established. My mother and I were still navigating our new relationship, still discovering who we could be to each other without the distorting influence of old family dynamics. I was still learning how to trust, how to receive as well as give, how to be vulnerable without being victimized. But for the first time in my life, I was moving forward rather than in circles. I was choosing my path rather than following one laid out for me. I was building connections based on mutual respect rather than obligation or manipulation. The night before my move to Chicago, I attended one final session with my support group. When it came my turn to speak, I found myself struggling to articulate the complex emotions surrounding this transition. "I guess what I'm trying to say," I finally managed, "is that standing up to my family wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. It gave me the space to figure out who I really am, what I really want, how I really want to connect with others. Gloria, our facilitator, smiled warmly. That's the work of a lifetime, Rebecca. And it sounds like you've made a beautiful start. Later that night, I wrote one last entry in the journal I'd kept throughout this journey. Tomorrow I leave for Chicago. New city, new job, new chapter. But the most important journey has been internal. I've learned that protecting myself isn't selfish but necessary. That family can be chosen as well as born. That boundaries aren't walls, but vital definitions of self. My father and brother planned to drain me financially, but in trying to take what wasn't theirs to take, they actually gave me something invaluable. The catalyst to reclaim my life, my worth, my future. Their greed ultimately freed me from patterns that had constrained me since childhood. I don't know what the future holds for any of us. Relationships evolve, people change, or don't. But I know this. I will never again surrender my voice, my boundaries, or my self-worth to anyone, no matter what name or claim they have on me. I am the keeper of my own life now, and that makes all the difference. As I closed the journal and placed it in the last box to be packed, I felt a sense of completion. Not an ending. Life didn't work in such neat narratives, but a milestone. I had faced my past, changed my present, and opened up possibilities for my future that once seemed impossible. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new growth, new connections. I was ready for them all, standing firmly on the foundation I had built for myself, brick by hard-earned brick.